Thank you for joining us. Hi, Joseph. Thank you. Thank you very much, John. You appreciate the love. Yeah, just let me know, Dr. Karim, when you would like us to officially start. Take your time.
Ready. We're ready.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the third session of the Beyond Extraction, Memory, and Revolt seminar series being hosted through my classrooms at the University of Amsterdam's School of Media Studies. My name is Dr. Jamila J, and this particular seminar is taking place as part of an undergraduate research thesis seminar called History in and Through the Archives. And it has a much longer title about colonialism and epistemic violence and all the themes that we've been exploring in the seminars already so far through the brilliant work, the absolutely brave and world-making research and interventions that students and junior faculty and graduate students are doing, much of which, to be quite frank, is my favorite work happening in the field. And to be even more frank, really puts a lot of faculty to shame in terms of the pertinence and the courage and the importance and the usefulness of the kind of research that's being done. And so these last three seminars, this one being the third, that will be featuring student panels and discussions, may very well prove to be the most important intervention we can do through this Beyond Extraction series. I'm very pleased to have students from all over the world coming to join us today. I will share that we were supposed to have a student from South Lebanon who unfortunately, due to the displacement because of the ongoing Israeli aggression and war crimes, was not able to join us. But we hope we can have him another day, and we hope very much for his safety. Similarly, we had another student who was supposed to be joining us from Qatar, but again, due to the security situation and evacuation and so on, that's not really possible. And so we hold space for them here today. I hope we can, all of us, at least in our hearts and minds, and to consider this as one small but very important example of the impact of racial imperialist Zionist violence on the ability of people in different sites of colonization and war to produce and share knowledge. This is just a tiny example of that much, much bigger epistemic violence and the bombings of schools and infrastructural destruction and all of the things, the media lies, all of the things. And so partly too, the way we hold space for those voices and for those knowledges is by acknowledging them and drawing on them and actually incorporating them into our research. And that's exactly what everyone else here is doing already. And so thank you for that. Thank you for bringing them in, even if they can't be with us. It's been a few weeks already since the launch of the US aggression against Iran, its spillover into Lebanon, its expansion across the region, and its repercussions around the world. And for that, I'd like to hold space also here today for all the martyrs, always all the martyrs. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Mariam Karim, who will be moderating the session along with my dear former student and always colleague, Emma Vibert. Please, Mariam and Emma, take it. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Jamila, for the introduction. This is, as you said, this is our third session as part of this series, Beyond Extraction, Memory and Revolt. So happy to see you all here. And of course, Emma, so happy to have you to help moderate the session today. It's a pleasure to meet you again. It's been a while since we connected. And looking forward to the presentations today. I'd like to introduce the series for those of you who, maybe this is your first time joining us. Beyond Extraction, Memory and Revolt is a free virtual seminar series committed to confronting and dismantling the colonial and white supremacist logics that continue to structure archives, media infrastructures, and heritage institutions. Moving beyond extraction as both method and metaphor, the series insists that memory is not a resource to be mined, cataloged, or commodified, but a living terrain of struggle. It spotlights the incredible intergenerational work of students, scholars, and practitioners to preserve resistant histories and alternative knowledge in the present and for the future. Our next series seminar is going to be on April 16th, and we will have Dr. Fatima Contreras, who will be talking about navigating French, Spanish, and Egyptian archives to excavate Egyptian women's magazines. So hope you can join us for that. I'll put the link in the chat shortly. Co-hosted by Archives and Digital Media Lab and Nasawiyyah Arab Media History, and convened within the broader framework of the Pedagogy for Archival Liberation Project, this series convenes an urgent and generative space for collective strategy and transformative praxis. It foregrounds the bold, cutting-edge research of our ADML fellows, who you will see shortly, and alongside students and junior faculty from around the world, whose work refuses neutrality and challenges institutional containment. The series is led by Dr. Jamila J, myself, Rose Miyonga, and Crystal Payne as part of the Pedagogy for Archival Liberation Project. It advances South-South and South-North exchanges that reject extractive knowledge economies and instead cultivate solidarities grounded in accountability, reciprocity, and return. Housed at ADML, it works to build a transnational network dedicated to reclaiming archives, knowledge system, heritage, narrative authority, history, and land from empire and white supremacy. To move beyond extraction is to refuse the colonial impulse to take without accountability, to extract stories, images, labor, land, and life while erasing the conditions of their seizure. Through memory and revolt, we gather not simply to critique these regimes, to strategize against them, to build collective power and advance liberatory praxis within and against the institutions that shape historical memory, media narratives, and knowledge production. As Dr. Jamila said, the series is embedded within Dr. Ghaddar's courses at the University of Amsterdam's Media Studies Department. This one, as part of the undergraduate research course titled History of and through Archives Contesting Colonial Narrative and Epistemic Violence. And the graduate seminar, as part of the graduate seminar class, which you will see in April 16th and beyond, as part of the archival activism course. So greetings to the students of the course as well. Bridging scholarship and struggle, theory and practice. The series brings community into the classroom and the classroom into the community, inviting participants to reimagine archival and heritage futures beyond colonial containment and toward reparative possibility. We hope that you will consider also supporting this work by donating to sustain accessible community-driven programming and expand this growing international network committed to memory as resistance. And I will also put this in the chat. And I would like to also introduce my fellow moderator today, Emma Vibert. who's also an ADML fellow. Emma, if you will allow me to read your bio. Emma Vibert it goes by she or they, is a white settler working as an archival assistant in Kejiptuk at the Nova Scotia Archives. She recently graduated with her Master's of Information, where she focused on epistemic oppression and suppression within archives. They are passionate about incorporating decolonial and critical archival theory into their archival praxis. Honored to be with you, Emma.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy that everyone uh, took the time to be here today. I'm just going to introduce our first speaker, who's Dr. Nisha Toomey. So Dr. Nisha Toomey holds a PhD in social justice education and is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Toronto's Department of Political Science, where she studies current directions in Canada's aid and international development agenda, and how international aid can better support local people's defense of their lands. So her presentation is The Settler Colonial Tendencies of Techno-Authoritarians, and I'm sure we're all very excited to hear it because I know I am. All right, take it away, Dr. Toomey.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to share screen. Okay.
Looks good.
Hi, everyone. Good job. Okay. Hi, everyone. It's so nice and such an honor to be able to join the panel with you today and speak with so many students and interested people. And I am speaking today from Toronto, from Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe territories. And I'm just going to start. So let me just, whoops. Hang on. Sorry. Can you still see it? No.
Yes,
Sorry.
we
I just
can
want to
see
be
it,
able, I want to be able,
but not full screen.
did I stop the share?
No, we can see it, but not full screen.
Oh,
If you go to
you
the
can
full
see it, but
screen,
it's not full screen. Got it. Yeah, no, I know. But then when I did that, it took away my notes for some reason. So
oh,
let me
you can
just,
right click presenter view.
okay.
Maybe make it full screen and then right click
Okay.
Pres
No.
presenter view, because we just did it with the.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I know it worked before. That's why it's weird. Okay, hang on. Sorry. Okay, you can still see it, right?
Yes.
Just gonna make it big. Oh dear. Okay, we'll figure it out in a second. I just want to be able to read my beginning part here. Okay, here we go. So in 2017, violence and oppression against the Rohingya population that had been going on for decades in Myanmar escalated into a series of atrocities amounting to genocide and ethnic cleansing that saw the mass murder and disappearance of tens of thousands and over 700,000 people forcibly displaced. It's widely understood today that Facebook bears a large portion of the responsibility for acclimatizing the population of Myanmar to a general acceptance of the killing of the Rohingya population, as Facebook did nothing to stop propaganda campaigns depicting Rohingya peoples in ways that dehumanized them and presented them as not belonging in the nation state of Myanmar. Facebook had just a few years earlier established itself as a widespread free access point into the internet for people residing in Myanmar. And this meant that it profited from being a vital part of communication infrastructure in the country, but one that was ultimately completely unaccountable when people in power and with an interest in forcibly displacing an ethnic minority group used Facebook, the communicative infrastructure, to further violence. Indeed, Mark Zuckerberg, who was in power at Facebook at the time and still is, has faced no form of justice for the genocide of the Rohingya population, and today continues to be one of the richest and most powerful people on earth. Social media platforms today represent an inescapable form of communicative infrastructure, and nationalism is today one of the biggest trending topics online. People are constantly propagandized online about the legitimacy of the colonial nation state and the idea that the nation state structures we have today are a good way of organizing our world. Of course, these structures have been only very recently imposed on us. We as people are not strictly identifiable by our nation states. Rather, who we are goes so much deeper. We are our cultures, our ancestral lineages, our ties to land, and we are travelers, the products of people who moved around and fell in love with people from other cultures and blended history together. Identification with these colonial nation states, which in their very short histories have been about grabbing land and imposing forms of power influenced by Western settler colonial extractive capitalism, is really narrowing and violent on people. And we just lived through an election in the US where the leaders ran on a deportation platform, where they used the idea of the legitimacy of US borders to dehumanize people who, quote unquote, don't belong. And in tandem with the established communications infrastructure that they rule over, they made this appealing enough for people to vote them in. And yet, those tech elites who have a bunch of different names, a bunch of terms now that people use for them, are not at all beholden to the nation state. Their capital, their businesses, the labor pools they draw from, their land ownership, their own ability to travel and move around is hypermobile and global. And they are trying to own and build everywhere. While not being beholden to the nation state, they use the ideology of the nation state to gain and keep power. And in this way, they've achieved maybe an ultimate settler colonial goal. So today, in a very brief talk, I want to talk about tech authoritarianism, and platform economics to offer a few basic definitions to help us understand the new landscape we are in, and to pinpoint that there are just a very few people, these tech authoritarians, who are disproportionately at fault for horrendous violence happening across the world, and to think about how this tech leadership class invokes narrative fantasies of the nation state for their own capital game, yet are untethered to the nation state and live outside and beyond its laws and geographies, and are now pursuing new settler colonial formations. What is that? Okay, so I'm going to just go through this now. You can see that, right? So here's a few definitions and things in parts of field that people are studying now. So platform economics is the kind of economy that we're now living through now. Platforms are distinguished from other industries because they do not produce products, but instead facilitate interactions between users as interoperable systems that host interactions between other businesses, orchestrating exchanges according to their codes and specifications so that they can get a cut of the trade. Platformization signals a merger of capitalism and communication, and we're now living with a pretty full-scale coordination of global arrangements of labor, health, education, activism, sex, culture wars, identity, politics, and life. In other words, unfortunately for us, we can't really do anything without platforms. We have entered a time when platforms have taken over what used to be material infrastructures. So, for example, they start maybe with digital products, but then they start to infiltrate material infrastructures. So, for example, what looks like a digital product like Airbnb starts to create capital accumulation that is not about producing commodity production and wages, but is taking from the fixed capital of earners, but then also turn around and actually start to influence and shift material infrastructures like real estate through being a system that people are now using. Platform companies require and create digital capitalism, where the accumulation of capital and power becomes mediated by digital technologies. And so these are the 10 richest and largest companies, and they all function at this point as digital platform ecosystems, and pretty much have taken over full infrastructural dominance across economy and society. And so what people are saying now is we're no longer in the time of neoliberalism. We've reached neo-feudalism. What this means is that the wealthy are so few now, and their power has become intensified and cemented through these network technologies that rely on an immense, cheap, and disposable labor class that are also made by the digital economies. So, for example, gig economies like Uber and all the kinds of delivery economies that rely on migrant laborers, on laborers who have very few rights in order to operate. And then they also present themselves as industry disruptors and as progressive technologies. And they ride in that way on very old colonial fantasies that are actually quite old Western European supremacist fantasies that imagine societies that have so-called technology as being superior, hierarchically superior. But in reality, nothing about society has actually been made better by these platforms. People are beginning to live in much worsened working and living conditions. And now we have something called network sovereignty. So once you have the merging of wealth and control of communications, and through those communications, you can actually control narratives and control imaginaries of how people are thinking. You've got a lot of concentration of power in the hands of a very few ultra wealthy people. And what network sovereignty means is that those very few people have the ability to shut off the technologies. They have the ability to shut down the platforms. And if they were to do that, it would cause a lot of issues for the whole society. And of course, this is not the era of digital capitalism is not new. It's been set through old tropes. Oh, here we go. Sorry, the definition of network sovereignty. Old tropes through media capitalism and old established power. Um, so this is sort of the definition, going definition of network sovereignty. A few billionaires are running platforms on which billions of precarious workers depend, and it produces a new kind of violent, extractive social relation. And of course, coloniality and Western empire have long relied on digital regimes, communicative regimes that look at certain populations as othered, and as the ability to have them be dehumanized, and also present other portions of the population as higher up in a hierarchy of humanity. Now, tech elites come into this because now they're actually so rich and living with such concentrated power that it actually ends up justifying their white supremacist, patriarchal, chauvinistic, misogynistic views that come from the beginning of Silicon Valley. But it gets actually justified through the amount of wealth that they've been able to accumulate. And they are, at this point, some of the very, very richest and most powerful people on earth. There's a great recent research done by the Rosa Luxemburg organization called the Authoritarian Stack. It's worth going to look at. So it talks about how the military industrial complex is now really taken over by these tech elites, and they're doing war as part of their business. They're killing people as part of their capital accumulation. So I have three ways that I understand these tech elites to be settler colonial. One is they're really deeply engaged in governance of the nation state. That authoritarian stack research looks deeply into that as well. But we know that the Department of Government Efficiency run by Elon Musk. In Canada, we have something called Build Canada. It tried to be a Doge. It actually is very close to being a Doge type institution where it is all the richest tech people who have these extremely settler colonial, racist, extractivist logics, and they write about it all. And actually, the Carney government takes up a lot of their ideas. The second way is that they reside in their own corporate towns outside the rule of the nation state. So when they establish, when they buy up land, they build that land using migrant labor, using a lot of coerced, low paid wage labor. And then they try to establish themselves as the mayors or governors. And the third way is through these network states and chartered cities. And there's a few of them. Something interesting about them is that they're not very successful. So this is the one in Honduras. It's called Prospera. It's probably the best established one. So they're trying to make these cities where they live outside the rules of the nation state that they're inside of, and they're supposed to be these very technologically advanced places. They suck up the water from neighboring towns and villages. They try to push and coerce governments to allow them to make these cities, and they use low-waged and migrant labor to make their cities. But something important, this is the NEOM one in Saudi Arabia, is that they're their ideas, their ideations right now, but none of them have actually been successful. And of course, we have this disgusting imagining of what they want to do with Gaza as part of their very clear settler colonial genocide that they have enacted. And I think that that's the end of my time, but I think it's important for us to know that there's a small amount of people doing this, and they need to be shut down. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Toomey. That was a really interesting presentation. I feel like I'm going to be thinking about it for a really long time. Definitely the rest of the day. And next up, we have Andrew Sandock. So Andrew is the archivist for Arabic and Islamic manuscripts at Trinity College in Dublin. His research circles questions of futurity, exilic memory practice, and Palestinian tactics of archiving. He is a graduate of the Archives and Records Management MI program at the University of Toronto's Faculty of Information. And his presentation is called In Search of Liberatory Appraisal for Palestinian Archives. So welcome, Andrew. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Mariam. Thank you, Jamila, for hosting us today. It's a real pleasure to see you all and to be here. My name is Andrew Sandock, and as was mentioned, I am an archivist recently based in Dublin, Ireland, where I work in Arabic and Islamic manuscripts at Trinity College. And I'll be presenting, sorry, is that can you hear me? Okay. Okay. I'll be presenting a very abridged version of some research that I completed during my Master's of Information degree, which really came out of a time of great loss, foremost the unthinkable human loss we've suffered in the genocide in Gaza, and the loss of even more, the loss of things that tie us to our land, that teach us about how we arrived in this moment and our trajectories for the future. So I had the honor of observing and working on the ground level with some amazing archival projects in Palestine these past few months. Yeah, I mean, I was asked directly not to share information about where many of these sites were and what kind of content they contain, because if this becomes known, there is always a very good chance that the IDF will come in and take these things all away, or they'll target them for destruction as they have plenty of time. And this is a story that maybe began or not began in late October 2023, when Israel aimed a missile directly at the Central Archives of Gaza, reducing hundreds of years of the cultural record to ash, or one that goes back to 1982 with the looting of the Palestine Research Center by occupying Israeli forces in Beirut, or it can go back even farther to 1948 with Haganah troops clearing out the homes of countless Palestinian families as they fled the Nakba. And this was the foundation of many of including the Israeli National Archives and National Library, are populated with the materials stolen during this time. And we can also argue that it's a story that stretches back hundreds of years, where through British Mandate authorities and foreign Orientalists, or even 11th century Crusaders claiming relics and codices for themselves and carrying them back home, where they remain until today in Europe in institutions like the one where we work and study. So it's perhaps a story without a beginning, but for our sake, I'm really interested in focusing on the acceleration of archival destruction and theft that's taken place both since the foundation of the Zionist state in Palestine and also since October 7th. And the moment that we find ourselves in today, where absolutely nowhere within historic Palestine is safe for Palestinian archives, where, where um, or Palestinian memory is as indiscriminate a target as the lives of Palestinian people. So there is this kind of classic modernist reading of the archive that it is, as Derrida would define it, a site of consigned memory. So one which conveys some sort of absolute truth about the past. And Ann Stoler describes the archive as the supreme technology of colonial rule, where colonial apparatuses may therefore reify an understanding of history that lends support to the teleology and validity of their own present, so which defines reality itself. So they can function as a means of colonial dominance, both bureaucratically and epistemologically. And in the case of the Israeli archive, much of what is literally constructed with stolen Palestinian archives, the Israeli state, in order to construct its concept of nation and history, must simultaneously demolish and appropriate the Palestinian nation and its history. And so I identify this process as a process of epistemicide, the attempt to destroy Palestinian ways of knowing in order to proliferate hegemonic colonial epistemologies or their own true history. But who is permitted to speak through this archive, and what counts as evidence of the past in this settler colonial logic, in the settler colonial archive? And this threat is felt very viscerally throughout Palestine and throughout its diaspora. This winter I was visiting a project in the West Bank, and we were kind of like lifting materials out of a cellar to be looked at, and we were discussing, possible arrangement schemes. And I kind of embarrassingly said, okay, well, you'll want to think about how to do it in such a way so that in 50 years or 100 years or even 1,000 years, whoever is using these materials for research will understand how to find things. And of course, the response from the heritage worker working on the project was like, oh, 50 years, how nice. Like it must be to be able to think that far ahead into the future. And it's like, of course, this is the thing that's on everyone's mind. It's this unironic, pervasive feeling of dread. And what has resulted is this frenzied archive fever. So in reaction to these escalating conditions, Palestinians are attempting to preserve anything and everything they can get their hands on before it's destroyed or before it's taken away or before they're killed, before this work can be done, which is a totally legitimate worry that's being raised. It's been raised to me. So along with these big projects, we're also seeing these massified digitization projects where people are taking thousands of records at a time to be digitized, even before any kind of appraisal, before any kind of cataloging. And copies are being made and stored in separate servers and drives. And this is happening on all levels, at the grassroots level, in mosques and churches and living rooms, in schools. And it's also happening at larger institutions like Birzeit University, the Palestinian Museum, Digital Archives, where they have this sort of post-custodial thing going where people send in materials which are digitized and then sent back. And they have this huge online repository, frankly devoid of kind of any coherent arrangement. But this is a stated policy of these institutions. This defies the colonial logics, which say this is how archiving is to be done. These are the standardized appraisal protocols you need to go through to determine which materials should be kept, which materials should be prioritized for digitization. So in this extremely dangerous atmosphere where literally everything is at risk, who is to say what is worth preserving? Which existing appraisal tactics can be deployed here to determine the categories upon which we select and appraise archival materials? And it's an impossible question. And the reaction has largely been one of dissensus, one of a decolonial logic that forces us to confront a different reality that many of us are used to in our work. In Palestine, the archive is not simply a place where the past is stored, but it's a site of struggle, of epistemological struggle. It's large in scale, it's diffuse in nature, And it points to a reclamation of what Trio would call unthinkable histories, which lie outside of the colonial purview and cannot be slotted into the colonial archives filled categories, whose own presupposed classifications can only digest like these decolonial enunciations of history in small fragments. So this is an intervention taking place which challenges the certainty with which the colonial archive is affirmed as this authoritative record of the truth or of the past, but instead is an epistemic delinking through disobedience and through dissensus. So to be clear, the categories of appraisal cannot merely just be, liberatory categories of appraisal cannot merely just be resistance or settler colonialism, because not only are these materials all facing enormous physical risk, but they also all seem entirely relevant to the Palestinian experience of occupation. In Palestine, the political and the everyday are completely collapsed into one another. And it seems what our current, or maybe our Euro-American methods of appraisal seem to be unable to account for is this totalizing permeation of coloniality into every aspect of Palestinian life. So if you consider these two photographs, which I pulled from the Palestinian Museum digital archives, in one, soldiers raiding the old city of Nablus, it's an obvious choice for preservation. If you're trying to make this decision, the soldiers rounding the corner, the smirk on their face, and these men rushing across the street, the slogan spray painted on the wall behind them. But what about this photo of a wedding in Wahdat camp in Jordan? This photograph offers a different dimension of colonized life, the debris of everyday life relegated to the margins, and it's packed with context, with the history of how these people arrived in this place in the first place, or to this moment. So we're dealing in excesses of reality. That's kind of the struggle of the Palestinian archive, is to capture these excesses of reality, which are completely, touched by these atmospheres of coloniality. And maybe it's the impossible attempt to represent those excesses or to represent the unrepresentable totality of colonialism by trying to archive it all, which is in the end an act of resistance archiving. And this can all be problematized. But I think essentially it is not merely an act of preservation, as the modern archive purports to do, which is to freeze Palestine in a certain past as it once was, but rather it's a transformative act which rejects the intent to preserve and its implied historical temporality. And Benjamin says, to articulate what is past does not mean to recognize how it really was, but instead it means to take control of a memory as it flashes in a moment of danger, so before it's inducted into this historical past. So the world in this temporality is in a constant state of becoming and emergence. So rather than scrutinizing this photo on the right and trying to decide whether to digitize based on the historical and research values of the current moment, the job may be to somehow detect that state of emergency, to not look in the past or the present for our categories of appraisal, but somewhere else for a new liberatory consciousness. So if the past continues to exist, the future will not stop existing. So if we cannot rely on these values of the past to appraise for our present moment, then how can we reasonably rely on the values of the present moment to appraise for the future, this terrible present moment, to appraise for what is supposed to be a liberatory future? The categories we choose now to base appraisals on must neither imitate the values of a historical past, which don't exist, or to embed themselves within the current structures of settler colonialism, which structure the form of the archive. So can a temporal switch be made in this case? Can an appraisal instead call upon the values of a future, of a liberatory future? And can we anticipate this future, this liberated future, in our appraisal practice rather than relying on the categories of the past? So yes, this photo of a wedding, that took place in 1987, but it activates a temporality with not just what happened in that year, but with what could have been, which gestures toward what could be. So of course we're limited. We cannot know what these values of this liberated future are, but we can reach towards that horizon of possibility and to listen for the expectations of that future from us. So we do not know what these values of a liberated future are, but we know that they're there. They're in our archives as we have them. We have in our hands now what will matter in this future. A liberatory appraisal of our archives is therefore an unthinkable one. But it is the dedication to an archival practice which seeks to breathe life into possible futures, which may be inconceivable, but which exist, prefigured nonetheless. And yeah, it is an operation to sense what must be coming, to work towards the unknowable. So while I can't draw up exact guidelines for such an appraisal method, well, I think this is an impossible task. I think we can look at the work being done in Palestine and feel that they are provoking, if not such a method, then such a mode of appraisal. And I want to really highly commend all the incredible work that's being done above and under the radar to appraise for liberatory futures across Palestine and across its diaspora. And that's my time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was a really, I think, important presentation that really kind of concretizes some of the theoretical things that people are thinking about right now. Next, for our presentations is Doa Khan, who is an architect and conservationist turned archivist with a Bachelor of Architecture from the National College of Arts, Pakistan, and an MA in Conservation Studies from the University of York. Her research interests include displaced and fragmented colonial archives and the informational and digital inequalities of the cultural heritage domain. I'm very excited about her presentation about the Confronting Hidden Histories of the Institutional Collections of Colonial Lahore. So take it away, Doa.
Hi, can you see my screen?
No, we did for a while and now it's gone. Can you please try again?
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
Try the present.
Do you see the presenter mode or the screen?
Full
like
screen.
your slides.
Thank you.
Okay. So I will be speaking about two main institutions, colonial institutions in Lahore, where I have been the institutional archivist. So I've had privileged access to their collections. So just a note on the archival infrastructure and policies in Lahore and in Pakistan, they don't exist. So a lot of our work has been ad hoc, and we don't have any information studies programs in Pakistan. So it's usually people coming from architecture, from cultural studies, from the arts into this field or history. So these two, firstly, I've selected these institutions because I worked there, but also because they were created by the British for express purposes. And even now they've preserved the networks and dynamics and the original purpose, even though the actors are different. So these are important institutions that are performing the same functions which they were created for. It's just that the political actors have changed. So Punjab, this is a map of Lahore from 1893. Lahore is the capital of Punjab, and the Punjab was annexed by the British in 1849 after the defeat of the Sikh Empire. And at the time, the British had set up their residences near the river and around the suburbs of the walled city. This all changed following the 1857 War of Independence, where the local Indian troops mutinied against their superiors and attacked the officers and families that lived between, which were now. So these in 1857, these houses, these residences, which are set up around the old city of Lahore, they were attacked, and the families and the officers, they were sandwiched between the river Ravi and the mutineers or the rebels. And a lot of them were killed, and the rest only survived when reinforcements arrived just in time from Amritsar. So this was seen as a major governance failure, and following which the administration of India was officially transferred from the East India Company to the British Crown to prevent future rebellions. And to prevent future rebellions, the British Raj implemented a policy of establishing colonial intermediaries and educating and shaping the minds of the locals to be loyal to the empire. Therefore, the first thing they did was move their families to the Miami garrison, now the Lahore cantonment, which is also where I'm situated, and to establish only the secretariat in a walled enclaves next to in the original location. And in 1861, they upgraded the Lahore Canal to provide defense to provide a boundary and a form of fortification, a moat protecting the garrison where all the white families were from the natives. And in 1864, the government college was established. In 1875, the Mayo School of Arts was established next to the government college. And in 1886, the Aitchison Chiefs College was established. And in 1924, the Punjab Archives were established. And they created this this route from the garrison, Lahore cantonment, to the Punjab Secretariat, to the Civil Secretariat. And within the Secretariat, they adapted a Mughal-era tomb to function as the Punjab Archives. And all these, the hierarchies that were created in the colonial design of Lahore and the function of the institutions, where they are, where the students are coming from in these institutions, they are still almost exactly the same. So the Punjab Archives are located within, this isn't an institution I'll be talking about, but just to give you an idea. So they are located within the Civil Secretariat. There have been plans to move them to the records to other locations because the building isn't suitable. But apart from actually navigating the bureaucracy and the red tape of the archive, it's also physically difficult to gain access to this walled enclave. So the first institution I'll be talking about is the Mayo School of Arts, which is now the National College of Arts, where I graduated from. So formally established in 1875 to standardize and promote local craft and the so-called industrial arts, it was established alongside the Lahore Museum, following the model of the South Kensington Museum. John Lockwood Kipling, father of Rudyard Kipling, was jointly the principal of the Mayo School of Arts and the curator of the Lahore/Central Museum. And craft was promoted as a marketable commodity rather than cultural heritage. The MSA was restructured in 1958 and renamed the National College of Arts in 1950. So in 1958 through a Fulbright grant. One of the functions of this institution was to help the British Raj coordinate colonial craft exhibitions locally and also provide material for exhibition in the UK and elsewhere as well. One of these exhibitions was the Franco-British exhibition held in London in 1908. As the name suggests, the exhibition was co-organized and co-sponsored by both France and Britain and featured exhibits celebrating the colonial achievements of both empires, including so-called native villages, and craft exhibitions meant to highlight the success of imperialism. We know from records at the NC Archives that models, photographs, drawings illustrative of the work of the Education Department and of Law and Justice in India had been requested from various institutions in India, including the Mayo School of Arts. I was able to trace one of these photographs to the Royal Commonwealth Society collections at the Cambridge University Library. Looking at the metadata record of the image itself, I was able to identify both its date and the fact that the lamp at the back was then being exhibited at the Franco-British exhibition, which helped us identify and locate related records at the NC Archives. And by doing this, I was not only able to identify the exact moment of the lamp's inception and the evolution of its design, but also the trajectory of the lamp's travels from Lahore to London and back, and then finally from Lahore to Agra, as well as the exact moment the box containing a large lamp for the Taj at Agra was received by the archaeological survey in the city. So this was a revelation for us as well, because while this had been a huge project at the time, we did not realize that a lot of the fixtures which were installed in the Taj and other places in Fatehpur Sikri were actually manufactured at the Mayo School of Arts in Lahore. Here is a photo taken by me at Akbar's tomb near Agra on a student trip to India before I was aware of this history. On the left is the letter from earlier, where it is mentioned that lamps are also required for Akbar's tomb in addition to the Taj. These lamps were part of wider efforts initiated by the Viceroy Lord Curzon towards restoring historical sites around India, most notably the Taj Mahal, and portraying the British as a civilized and civilizing force that loved the people and cultures it ruled. However, at the same time, Lord Curzon was also known for partitioning the Bengal, which ripped apart the fabric of Bengali society and triggered widespread violence and protests. Ignoring this, Jawaharlal Nehru, however, stated that after every other viceroy has been forgotten, Curzon will be remembered because he restored all that was beautiful in India. So at the moment, last I checked, the actual stewards of the Taj in India at the moment weren't aware of this history. And while working at the NCA, at the National College of Arts, I did intend to establish contact with them. It was difficult because of the hostilities between India and Pakistan and the fact that we were working, I would have needed to, as an institutional archivist, a public sector archive in a public sector institution, it was difficult to establish contact with a government official on the other end. Another issue that becomes apparent in the above mentioned photograph is the prevalence of children within the workshops at the Mayor School of Arts. This leads us to ask who these children were and how the experience of childhood differed between the colonies and the metropole. We know from photocopies obtained from the Punjab archives that children had been present at the MSA since at least 1878. Here, the then officiating principal remarks that he himself had been doubtful whether these children were not too young to profit greatly by instruction. Interestingly, 5 of these smaller boys are also referred to by name within this letter. However, all of this leads us to wonder that if these children had initially been considered too young, even by 19th century standards, then how young would they appear through a 21st century lens? Moving on, documents from the archive also shed light on a stipend announced for MSc students who belonged to what the British had declared an artisan caste. Both these applicants where you would be declared an artisan if you had relatives who were either carpenters or anyone who is considered an artisan. So both these applicants were declared artisans, with the one on the right being certified as a born artisan. Documents such as these can help reveal the role of the British Raj and its native intermediaries in the consolidation of casteism and hereditary forms of work within Indian society. While not being a partition archive, the collections also hold traces of the trauma of the 1947 partition, including this letter retrieved from the personal file of R.R. Trivedi. I won't read it out loud in the interest of time. The collections also include war propaganda and related items created at the Mayo School of Arts during the First World War. And this is a role that the National College of Arts currently continues to play. Obviously, the government has changed from the British to the political system we have at the moment, but it goes against the image that the institution would like to give of being an independent and progressive art institution that does not work for the authorities. And we also, at the NC archives, we also had pamphlets from the Second World War where the empire made concerted efforts to reach local communities in their native languages. Here we see a pamphlet regarding the Lahore Warplane Fund asking locals to donate towards the cost of the aerial defense of the city. Moving on to our second institution, we come to the Aitchison Chiefs College, which was established in 1886 in Lahore on almost 200 acres of land as a continuation of the Ward School in Ambala. The purpose of this institution was to educate the relatives of the ruling chiefs of the Punjab, youths of good family, and the minors under the guardianship of the Court of Wards. But the main purpose, the unstated purpose, was to have important princes and sons of chiefs in one location where they could be trained to love the British Raj, to adopt European ways, and then trained in the service of the empire. So student records also show a very detailed analysis of every individual's personality, their weaknesses, their likes, their dislikes, and it feels as if, and it is almost surveillance under the guise of education. So the founder of the college, then Lieutenant Governor of the province, said, "This is an institution from which you will banish everything in thought and word and act that is mean, dishonorable, or impure, and in which you will cultivate everything that is virtuous, true, manly, and gentlemanly." And obviously, in colonial speak, this means that you become a European and you give up your native ways. I won't read this out, but it should give you an idea of just how much of the civil services, the police, army, judiciary, etc., were controlled by graduates of the Aitchison College. And this, by some estimates, continues till present day. This is a photo from 1898, but many of these families continue to hold important positions in Pakistani society, continue to send their sons to Aitchison College, and continue to have a say on how the legacy of the Aitchison Chiefs College should be presented to the outside world. One of these legacies is of integration and communal harmony within the student ranks at Aitchison before partition. However, looking at the archive reveals religious and communal segregation and prejudices and tensions similar to society at large. Additionally, one Aitchison alumnus, pictured here in the center, Yadavindra Singh, who later became the Maharaja of Patiala, has been accused by multiple sources as being the architect behind the genocide of Muslims in East Punjab during the partition of 1947. So in our own projects at the Aitchison College, one of the issues we're facing is that our projects are focusing on tolerance and working together with our counterparts on the other side of the border to reveal our shared histories from before the partition. Now, an issue faced is that we cannot highlight this part of this part of Yadavindra Singh's history, because then that causes communal tensions. And personally, it makes me question whether it's even possible to have a project grounded, focusing on tolerance and reconciliation without justice and without actually excavating what has actually happened. Thank you. End my presentation there.
Thank you so much, Doa. I honestly hope that you write a book, because I would read that book of that presentation. That was great.
But I just came over a lot of this because I was already over time.
So next, we have Kelsey Morgan. So Kelsey Morgan is a dedicated researcher located in Mi'kmaq, where I am also located. After spending her childhood and adolescent years in Qatar, Kelsey returned to Turtle Island and earned a Master of Arts and a Master of Information from Dalhousie University. Her research focuses on decolonizing library practices, particularly through the interrogation of cataloging language. So her presentation, Cataloging Palestine, Investigating Cultural Imperialism, in its subject headings, it will be our last presentation for the day. So take it away, Kelsey.
Thank you, Emma. Can I just confirm that you're seeing my PowerPoint there?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay, perfect. All right, so yeah, my name is Kelsey. I'm going to be giving a bit of an overview of my MI thesis project that I did under Jamila's supervision. It was called Cataloging Palestine, Investigating Cultural Imperialism in Subject Headings. So I want to start by just kind of briefly addressing the coloniality of library practices by outlining the role of libraries within a colonial context. Andrew and Doa's presentation, I think, have kind of set up this conversation about the power that these institutions have. I've also included this quote from Elise Vibert: "Libraries are an institution of knowledge organized in a way that perpetuates colonialism. In libraries, materials are prearranged in a way that implies the use of many worldviews. However, this is almost never the case, and they often portray a Eurocentric ideology. So while this is geographically apart from Palestine, Vibert is writing in the context of settler Canada, I would argue that understanding the way that these colonial institutions affected the indigenous population of Palestine kind of gives us a window into the indigenous populations of settler Canada, gives us a window into the way that these institutions affect indigenous populations more generally. So the methodology that we undertook for this project was a research action project. The goal was to create a critical genealogy tracing past and ongoing work by Arab information professionals to address anti-Palestinian bias in standardized cataloging thesauri. That term, critical genealogy, I'm borrowing from Angela Davis in Abolition Feminism Now. And she talks about this idea of creating a critical genealogy and says that narrating a history of the present ecosystem, attending to subjugated knowledges and erasures, gestures to the underlying strata of necessary collective labor. So my goal with this project was not to sort of make any of the decisions about how Palestinian materials should be cataloged, but to take up some of that labor in disseminating the really important work that Arab information professionals have been doing that in the case of the women that we had at this roundtable, they are just so busy and don't have time to write about, but also, of course, we're seeing deliberate erasure of work being done by Arab information professionals, and in some cases, the work kind of being used without them being actually cited for it. So we organized this roundtable event with Rula Shahwan, Basma Chibani, and Khalid Dimashq, library professionals working in Palestine and Lebanon. And our goal was to give the participants an opportunity to discuss their own experiences cataloging materials, and also to give them a platform to strengthen their relationships by discussing shared goals and experiences. So one of the first issues that came up in my research on this topic was Romanization. I would say that it was by far the topic that came up the most in my research. It was also kind of the most broad in that it affects really cataloging materials from any environment where they're speaking a non-Latin language. So the Library of Congress doesn't allow non-Latin script in subject headings. So if you're cataloging materials in Arabic, Turkish, Farsi, for example, you need to Romanize. The process of Romanizing is not just challenging, but it has the potential to obscure the true meaning of the subjects being cataloged. So Ali Huissa, Edward Yadko, and Mohammed Amara have all kind of talked about the issues with Romanization in relation to Arabic naming practices. Dagger and Sufi have documented all sorts of very specific challenges: vowelization, the addition of diacritical marks on Arabic letters, shada, geminization or consonant doubling, and sukun, the absence of vowels, saying that these all pose challenges to Romanization. For example, the lack of shada can result in even misgendering what is being cataloged. Dagger and Sufi provide some really clear examples of the unique qualities of Arabic that are lost in translation. Basma Chibani has listed some of the initiatives that the American University of Beirut has undertaken to decolonize their catalogs. So one of the priorities that came up at our roundtable for Basma was making sure that users of the library could search for materials in their native language. Basma herself is published in Arabic and explained that a lot of Arabic books can't be adequately described using Library of Congress. So her kind of workaround for this was to catalog materials in Arabic first and add as many kind of variants as possible. These are the same sorts of suggestions that we saw from Sufi and Dagger, who recommended adding Romanization variants when cataloging in Library of Congress. It's a really labor-intensive process, but it mitigates some of the discoverability issues that are associated with Romanization. Religion was another major issue that was coming up when trying to catalog materials in Library of Congress, Dewey Decimal. One of the really common issues that I was seeing coming up in my research in relation to Islam was the term Mohammedanism being used. This is something that Sanford Berman had noticed in the 90s and written about, that this was a word being used. It's a word that Said addressed specifically in his book, saying that this word Mohammedanism quite incorrectly assumes that Muhammad was to Islam as Christ was to Christianity. And we're seeing here this kind of Orientalist logic that Said wrote about, where the understanding of the Orient emerged according to a detailed logic governed not simply by empirical reality, but by a batter of desires, repressions, investments, and projections. So we're getting this kind of projection of Christianity onto Islam. Another one of the major issues that came up here was classifying materials relating to Islamic law. Yagko in the 90s, again, had pointed out that there's immense literature relating to Islamic law in all major languages of the Middle East, but at the time of his writing, there was no Library of Congress classification. There is now a classification for Islamic law, but as Chobani tells us, it's incredibly broad. So her suggestion was to make local concepts so that we can acknowledge the sort of nuance and specificity within the practice of Islamic law, rather than kind of treating it as one. Something that was kind of disappointing in my research was that there's very little critical study done on the topic of time periods kind of generally. I was finding some research specifically to Palestine and Lebanon, but in sort of mainstream library and information studies, the sort of topic of power and authority within time divisions wasn't really addressed adequately, I felt. So this is an example that Chobani did raise about inaccurate subject headings for Lebanese history. This heading is from the Library of Congress, Lebanon History, Israeli Intervention, 1982 to 1985. Setting aside that word intervention for a minute, Chobani pointed out that this date, 1985, isn't really accurate because Israeli troops didn't withdraw from Lebanon until the year 2000. So we see the way that this nuance of dates works to manipulate narratives. Another major issue was place names coming up. So we're starting to see some critique of Sanford Berman's work coming up here. In 2018, Holloway, the director of metadata strategies at James Madison University, pointed out that in 1971, a scant 4 years after the Six-Day War, Sanford Berman published a manifesto on bias in the Library of Congress that did not include any subject headings relating to the Middle East. Chobani talked about the inaccurate geographical names that are present in Library of Congress and argued that the names are often misspelled, inaccurate, or don't reflect local realities. So again, returning to her work at the American University of Beirut, in her thesaurus for the Palestinian Oral History Project, Basma and others created an extensive 72-page long thesaurus of place names. Rula Chauhan also noted that in British archive materials relating to historic Palestine, you'll often see them cataloged under Israel. Historic events was another major issue that was coming up. And again, we can see the way that this is just kind of textbook Orientalism. As Edward Said pointed out, if you look at, for example, the differing narratives between the American view of the Gulf War versus the Iraqi view of the war, the United States was not a classical imperial power, but a righter of wrongs around the world. And so this is something that Blair Kuntz pointed out in his research really extensively, the way that Library of Congress uses the word war versus invasion, depending on how it sort of meets American needs. In 2024, Denise Sufi and Imam Dagger put together a working group to create to create Library of Congress terms relating to the ongoing genocide in Palestine, this sort of iteration of it. And despite their best efforts, the Library of Congress terms that ended up being approved were all sort of Israel, Hamas, war. And so Sufi announced this to MILA members. MILA is the Middle East Librarians Association. And, everyone sort of acknowledged in this email chain that this was not an adequate way to describe what was going on. She offered some kind of workarounds, like adding terms like atrocities, blockades, casualties, destruction, and pillage, but still we're not seeing a term in the Library of Congress catalog that can be used as is that accurately depicts reality. And so finally, the sort of major one that came up in our roundtable was political movements and organizations. Something that I found really striking is that when you look at the Library of Congress catalog, there are all sorts of terms for feminists in various parts of the world. There's British feminists, American feminists, there's African American feminists, but there's no way to catalog Arab feminists. Obviously, there's a great deal of literary warrant for Arab feminists. There's a great deal of literature written by Arab feminists, but it is not in the Library of Congress. So I reached to Shalil Kevorkian for kind of analyzing this. In The Politics of Invisibility, she writes that building a feminist methodology to research invisibility in conflict zones requires one be attentive and be able to document women's resistance and struggles against power relations. So it's really important that we be able to document Arab feminists. So in terms of how to deal with this at the roundtable, this was something that kind of sparked a little bit of debate amongst the participants. All of them were in agreement that there really needs to be a counter thesaurus, that it is something that requires a lot of collaboration. Gada Dimashq came up with some really challenging questions, like if you're cataloging a book that deals with the Israeli narrative, are you cataloging that in a way that is accurate to the source? Or by doing that, are you sort of legitimizing the occupational state? There was no clear answer, but it kind of shows the need there is to have these sorts of conversations, right? And the need that there is for this to not be the work of one, but for it to be a group effort. Basma Chobani, totally on board with this idea of coming up with a counter thesaurus, but also was really careful to reiterate that you can't kind of just withdraw from the institution, that we also at the same time need to be fighting what is going on in the institution and need to be participating or petitioning for change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. Now we will be moving on to a short discussion amongst the presenters. They all have a chance to speak to each other, which I think will be very interesting.
Yes, thank you so much. I invite the presenters to turn on their camera, so I will put you, we can kind of have we have only about close to 10 minutes left for this session. I welcome questions from the audience, and we had already someone asking how they can reach out to you. So if you don't mind putting in your emails or any other or social media or way that you welcome people to connect with you. Really, it was such an excellent session today. Oh, Nisha, let me add you. I learned so much, and they all connected and complemented each other in so many different ways. But before I step into kind of my thoughts, I welcome you if you have any questions to each other or anything you'd like to say before we have to close in 10 minutes. And of course, if anyone has any questions, please put it in the chat. Okay, let me go ahead. Firstly, Dr. Nisha, thank you so much for your presentation, Techno-Authoritarianism. I never thought about it in this way, and the way you've outlined the different levels that they operate in terms of what kind of data they encompass, and the platforms and what they control, how they were set up, the places they were at, and all these different levels. I was thinking about the fragility of that, because it's so concentrated and monopolized in this way, that also comes with a lot of weaknesses. So I was thinking about that as you were presenting, and this connected, of course, also to afterwards we had Andrew's presentation, which kind of offered this kind of alternative as always resisting. It's always an archive of resistance. Just as you said, colonialism affects people's lives at every level. It's also therefore there's resistance at every level as well. So I was thinking about those connections. And Dua, it's always such a pleasure to see. I had seen a version of this presentation when you visited us in Qatar. My students who were so excited after your presentation, they kept mentioning it afterwards. And you mentioned the Cambridge, those records of the National School of Arts is now at Cambridge University. What are some of the efforts, if I understood correctly, are there any efforts to kind of bring those back? And so forth. And Kelsey, I really want to know more about Arab feminist cataloging and archiving. So definitely a conversation there, and I hope to connect, if not here, also in the future. So maybe we can start in the order of the presentations. We can start with Dr. Nisha if you want to kind of speak to this or any other thoughts you have.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I agree. Like it's one of the things that I thought about a lot when I was doing the research for that paper that I wrote. And it started actually as a paper that was trying to understand migrant and migration narratives in Canada and how the kind of tech class was inserting itself into ideas about migration. And that's when I came across Build Canada, and that's when I ended up going down a large rabbit hole of anti-colonial platform studies. And I do think it's important for us to be thinking about, how seized in some ways we are. But I'm also always thinking about, like, how yes, they have the power, right, to turn on or turn off the way that we communicate. And yet, so much activism and information has been getting through and has gotten through, especially around the Gaza genocide, through these platforms that we all rely on, right? And so it's and they are fragile in the sense of, people talking about, how AI is being imposed on us in this really horrendous way without anybody's consent right now. But those farms are also just made out of metal, and they're set up in places near where we all live. And they're only as strong as they might be against whatever humans decide to do about them, right? And I mean by that what people mean, I think, by that, right? Like we can destroy these AI farms with our with our direct actions, right? And we can shut down in the same way as we've seen some of the successes around shutting down the imports and exports of weapons. So fragile, yes, also feeling really all-encompassing, and yet they are the things that we're using, right? And one of the pieces of hope that I do see is tech workers starting to sort of finally, or not, maybe not finally, but wake up and say, we actually didn't want this when we went into the tech sector and became the programmers and the coders, right? And there's that, and actually saying like there needs to be a lot of counter programming and work on those levels.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Andy, any thoughts?
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Nisha, for that, for those comments. Like, I'm thinking a lot about, yeah, how these institutions do seem, in a way, like off limits to us now. And like Kelsey mentioned, for example, like how does the description of like an Israeli record take place, for example, and really demonstrated kind of in a meticulous way, like the way that the archive is structured, having those like cultural, like colonial logics engaged in it, and Dua as well, showing the way that these institutions can really enforce cultural power on a population. And I'm wondering about like an instance like in the Palestinian archive, in which so much of it is fragmented, so much of it currently sits on the shelves of Israeli archives, for example. Is it then safe to dismiss these institutions as these sort of modernist colonial institutions that serve no purpose to us, when it is also our memory and our history that sits on these shelves. And so I think that there is like a problematization there, and there's also a way to think about how we can engage with these technologies, with these institutions in a way that might not mm, sort of reify the colonial logics that are built into them. And I'm thinking of Edward Said and his logic of cultural imperialism, something like this, talking about reading contrapuntally history, reading history and literature and the archives contrapuntally in a harmonic way that allows us to see these things through the gaps, through the spaces, and to understand, you know, in decolonial ways, using or alongside or orthogonally to colonial institutions like the archive. And I think that's a bigger conversation. But thank you.
Thank you. Da?
So I have two questions in the chat, but I'll answer your question first. So the records in Cambridge, they're the photographs that were sent from the National College of Arts, from the Mayo School of Arts, to the Franco-British exhibition in 1908. And I have been in touch with the archivists at Cambridge, and they have been very helpful. They've sent us high resolution scans of the images, and they've been helpful in our archival practices. They're a wonderful team, but I don't know what can be done physically, whether they can be brought back, but we could potentially use linked data approaches to connect the different records that are scattered across the globe, because the empire itself and the colonial machinery itself, it wasn't limited to just the Punjab or just Pakistan, what is now Pakistan. But I think a harder thing what's harder is actually connecting our records with what the records in India, because there it's next to impossible to establish contact with government departments and have an exchange of information and a free exchange of data, especially considering that these projects take a lot of time, and peace between Pakistan does not last that long. So we can have a few months of peace and then a war or some sort of hostility. So these projects, even when they start, they do end up suddenly being shut down. So I have two questions in the chat. One is from Saira Haki. She asks, were there any areas of absence, omission you noticed in the institutional archives? So in the pre-partition archives, so we found some notices from the central government banning certain books or certain practices from these institutions, from the institutional libraries. And even with the rest, we had to read between the lines, because everything was being presented as an absolute good, of course. And the administrators working, who were locals, who were celebrated even now as the first native principal, as the first native architect, they in essence were civil servants working for the British. And another one absence I've noticed in both archives, in NCA and HSN, is a complete no information about what was happening in 1971 in Bangladesh, in what is now Bangladesh. Because for example, while reading the 1971 magazine, the student magazine at HSN, they are talking about the school play instead of actually discussing the fact that half the country is going to get separated. There's a full raging war because there's a media blackout. And in 1972, in both the institutions, there was a complete media blackout, and there's no talk of what was happening in Bangladesh. And suddenly, in 1972 onwards, we find that there are expressions of loss, of shock, and just trying to figure out what's just happened to them. And at the NCA, because Pakistani media industries were almost overwhelmingly, they were almost monopolized by the Bengalis. The Pakistan television had a huge participation of Bengalis. So they left overnight. So at the NCA, at least, what we saw was that so this was the main federal art institutions. So they had to then figure out and try to fill the gaps left behind by the people who had just become Bangladeshis. To them, to what we see in the archive, was overnight, because there's a blackout and suddenly we find that there's a new country. So there's nothing there to show that something's happening, that there is any tension. I think Amal asked.
Yeah, we can
I wonder how much of
the Amal's question, Dua, if you can quickly, because we have one more question to Kelsey before we have to close. We're at closing time. Thank you.
I wonder how much of the archive of Punjab is this ghostly space of British colonialism. So the issue with, especially in the institutional archive, is that when the British found Lahore, it had been destroyed. At least that's what they say. It had been destroyed. So they rebuilt modern Lahore. And a lot of these institutions they're entangled within our nostalgia related to the city as well. So even if you realize that these are like intrinsically colonial institutions which can't be reformed, because we associate our feelings of old Lahore with these institutions, it's difficult to say, it hurts to say, oh, let's just shut down this institution. So yes, it is mostly a ghostly space of British colonialism.
Thank you, Dua. Kelsey, we have a question for you in the chat. When building an open access collection, how best can we describe titles within these collections through associated metadata or other elements and approaches? And after this question, we will be closing the session. Thank you.
So one of the suggestions that came up in the roundtable and looking at the work from people at Middle East Librarians Association was adding as many variants as possible, and that can help increase discoverability. But also, I think sort of the main outcome of my research, I would say, is the importance of collaboration. Asking other people, making sure that you're reading research and talking to people who are actually affected. So like making sure when you're cataloging Palestinian materials that you are reaching to Palestinian voices for understanding how materials should be cataloged, and not trying to kind of catalog things in a vacuum. It's really labor intensive to take this much time to catalog materials and to reach out to other people and talk about it. I would say, as a settler researcher in this field, that is kind of my responsibility to help take up some of that labor, so that the people who are doing this sort of important research on the ground have time for that.
Thank you so much, Kelsey, and thank you, everyone. It was really such a pleasure to be with you today. I learned so much, and looking forward to continue this conversation. And thank you to all the participants and the audience for being with us. And we hope to see you again on April 16th for our next session. Take care.
So long. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.